Okay, so this is going to be a video about saving and loading data to and from a text file using C#. Now using text files is probably not the best method. The actual best method for saving data is through binary output, or in the case of C#, it's called serialization. However, text files are kind of the first road or the first understanding that you need to have before you can kind of learn about binary output and input. So we'll go ahead and get started here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of do a mock of your number 6 assignment for 202 in chapter 7 on page 469. That's the name search. The one thing I'm going to change is we're going to actually output the names, and then I'm going to show you the different ways that you can delimitate the names in the file, and we're just going to do one file of boy and girl's names. And then what we're going to do is we're going to allow the user to search those names. So the first thing is to output the names to a file. In the case of your assignments, basically for your actual, I believe number 3 I've assigned, or number 4, you're going to be reading in information from a file and then searching that for that information for a particular value. In the case of names, you're going to have to deal with uppercase and lowercase values because we are dealing with case sensitivity. But I think if you are doing number 3, you're just doing a search for a number, so you don't have to worry about it. But in any case, you should be able to apply what we do here today to your assignment. And of course, I'm not going to do this in the manner that your book shows, because that is, you can decide to do it the way your book does it, or you can decide to do it the way I like to do things, and hey, there's probably going to be some similarities. So what we'll do is we'll start a project first thing, and throughout this process I'm going to go ahead and probably do some research because I don't remember everything, all the code that you need to write. So I'll be getting into Google some keywords to find some values, or find some code that I'm going to be needing to work with. So one thing that we're going to be using is the I/O input-output library of C#, and what we're going to do is we're going to start with a Windows form, and let's call this desktop, and what we'll do is we'll name this names, something simple. And Windows Forms app, names, folder, good. So we will begin with that. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just output the names. Now, when you're doing output to a file, essentially you got different ways to delimitate the data in the file. And what we do when we're looking for information in a file is called parsing and tokenizing. There's a lot of different methods on how to do that. I'm going to show you 2 different methods. That is where you are using line breaks, such as a new line, as your delimiter, or you can use what's called a CSV, comma separated values, where you put a comma in between each value as a delimiter. We're going to be doing both. So I'm going to show you the line break method first, and then we will go ahead and get into comma separated values. So to begin with, let's just look at some of the code and some of the things that we're going to be using. And essentially what we need is to add a special using statement, and that's going to be using system.io, I believe. Maybe system.io. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so that refers to input output, and essentially what this is when you have a reference, essentially over here, for any kind of thing. The system contains some specific references for different libraries, and what we're doing is, since we've already added the code as a reference, then we're saying, okay, for that system IO, open up that namespace so I can use the input output library. So now we have access to the objects that are part of that input output library. And what I'm going to want to begin with is basically what I'm going to do is we're just going to create a button that just saves some names, and then we'll be able to load the names into what we'll do is we'll load them into an array and then display them on a list box. In this case, you're already going to have a file that saves data, or that has the data inside of it, so you're not going to have to do this step. You're just going to have to load it. But I think we want to I want to be as, I want to show you how to do this step. So I'm going to just add a quick button, and what that's going to do is it's going to be what we use to save the data. So I'll just change the text, and I'll call it save, and we'll just have this kind of at the bottom, and it's just a utility. So this is where we're going to want to actually save names to a file, and we're going to do using the line break method, where our delimiter is what we call essentially, if you have a string and you use \r \n, that is called a line break for text, for your output to a text file. And essentially it's just like taking and if you're typing things into a text file and you hit the enter key, what is injected into that text file is this code from ASCII code that means carriage return a new line. And when you open up that text file to view it, that line break is there. So essentially, kind of think about it as we're dealing with just straight up ASCII, so there's no word or word pad, it's just straight up text. And if you type in a line of data, so let's just say that we're going to be doing a name, and I hit enter, what happens in that file is that you don't see is there's actually a \r \n code put in there to signify that, hey, we have a new line here, and the notepad then knows that the next value that it contains should go on the next line. That's pretty much a line, basically a line delimitated file. Now, the problem with this is, if you were to go and you would want to do a space delimited file, well, what would happen if you had first and last names? So then you would read in the first name, and then you would use the space to know, hey, this is a token, and we're parsing and tokenizing, and then this is the first name, this is the last name when you read it in, and then of course the new line \r \n would be to the next name in the list. In the case that we're working with, we're just going to do first names and a line break, so we're not going to get too complicated, just because this is kind of mostly your first introduction to this sort of thing. So we're going to output names to the file, and we're going to begin with opening up the library and using some variables that actually set up what's called a file pointer. A file pointer represents the file itself and where in the file that you're currently writing to for your code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just a quick search on Google, and the keyword that I would use would be probably C# text file output. And we're just going to grab some examples here. Here's an example. It looks like we got the different lines. Now this looks like it is line delimited, and then write all text is not line delimited. So in this case, we are using what we call the StreamReader and the StreamWriter. This is basically the file pointer. So we will create a StreamWriter object. Now, since we're already using system.io, we don't need to have that in our code. We can just start with StreamWriter. So let's go ahead and write that in our code. I'm going to say StreamWriter, and there it is. And we're going to call this output, or f output for file output. Now that just instantiates the pointer or the reference. So now we got, or that just defines the pointer or the reference. We got to actually instantiate the memory for the StreamWriter and actually create that object. Now that object is what we're going to use. Now one thing about the StreamWriter object is it has 7 overloads for the constructor. So what you can do is you can decide, hey, how am I actually going to write this? And it looks like we can send it a path if we wish. So we can send it the full path, meaning the full directory structure, such as C:\\\. We need 2 backslashes because the backslash is a formatter, it's an escape character sequence. So 2 backslashes meaning we really mean a backslash. One thing that I like to do is I like to do implicit file creation. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the image or the name of the actual text file and nothing else. And so what will happen is, since we're telling it not to go to, we're not telling it to go to like C drive or D drive, is it will go to the only directory it knows that exists, and that is where your executable is running from. So you remember your executable is going to be built. So when we go and we compile this and we say build, rebuild, you look down here and it says that our executable is in C users JB desktop names bin debug names.exe. So the executable is running from this directory. So that's the directory where you have your names executable, where you would find output.txt. And it would just inject that as an implicit, the implicit place to put that file. Now, since we're running in the IDE, sometimes it will put it out here where the CS files are at, when you run it from the IDE. So you're going to be able to find your output.txt either in this folder or in this folder, the debug folder. And that's why it's kind of always nice to have a habit of where you put your projects is on the desktop, just so you're not hunting around for everything all the time. So let's go ahead and look at that folder. Here it is right here. So when you are creating that file, it's going to, if you do it from the IDE, the output is going to be here. If you do it from the executable, the output's going to be here. So let's go ahead, and since we've created the output file, now we can start writing things. But here's one thing that you always want to do. In this case, we're opening the file for writing, for output. Whenever you open up a file, a good rule of thumb is you always close the file when you're done, because if you don't close the file, nobody is going to be able to use it, because your system has ownership over that file until it's closed. So you are going to want to do that, and it doesn't look like this example shows us that particular thing. So let's see what we got. Let's try another example. That one doesn't do it either. Okay. One more, and then we'll give up on it. Let's see what Stack Overflow is. Well, doesn't look like this show much either. Okay, well, let's just go ahead and do it. So what you're going to do is you're going to say your output object, and you're going to say close. You have to have that. Open the file. Your process gets ownership of the file. No other process can interact with that file whatsoever. Then you close that file, and that means that your process no longer has ownership over that file, and another process can manipulate that file if they wish. The operating system, of course, controls that. So once we have ownership, our process has ownership over that file, then what we do is we're going to actually output some information. In this case, I am going to create an array of names, and then what we're going to do is we're going to save that array to the file, and we're going to use writeLine to do that. Write using the write command, and that would be where you do this, foutput.write. Now what that does is that outputs text that's inside of here, that it's going to be saved to the file, but it does not throw in that new line \r\n into the file. So there is no delimitation happening. It's just you literally outputting the text. Now if you were to do a write line, what it does is it'll output this to the file, and then it'll inject into the text that it outputs a \r\n, which means new line. So every time this write line runs, it outputs what is to go to the line, and then it puts in the new line characters so that when you open up a notepad, it actually is shown correctly. Okay, so I'll give you an example of both of those as we progress. But first, let's go ahead and make our array for our output. And I'm going to go ahead and do that as a field level variable, or what is other people would be calling is a global variable, but not really, because it's only global for the form. So we're going to create a string array of names. So I believe what we'll do here first is we will say I want an array of strings called sArray, and we're just setting up the reference. I don't want to actually instantiate it until I get to runtime code, which is going to be in the constructor of the form. And I'm going to say sArray is equal to a new string, and let's go ahead and just do 5 names. That's a good start. And then what we can then do is we can add and work with the values of sArray and go to each one and assign them to an actual value. And remember, we're just doing first names. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab some stuff here, and I'm going to throw in for each of those array values. We've got 5 of them. And let's go with just some stuff that I'm making up. Okay, so we have our 5 names. They're in our array, and now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to output that array of values to the file. So the file's open, and here's what we can do. If I were to do this, foutput, and we're going to want to output this 5 times, so we're going to actually want to create a loop, and in that loop we're going to go ahead and do using the file pointer, the file object itself, we're going to say output write, and then I'm going to say here, what am I going to write? Well, I'm going to write what is inside the array and each element inside the array. So essentially this I, what it's referring to is each of these numbers inside the array. So we're starting at 0 and we're going to less than 5. So we're going from 0 to 4. So since that's already text, we don't have to do toText or whatever. We're just going to say, hey, output those names, each name in the array, and do it 5 times. But now notice here that we're using the write statement. So essentially there's going to be no delimiter. We would use the write statement if we are going to work with a comma separated values, and I'll talk about that shortly. So we'll do both ways. So let's go ahead and just run it, and I'll show you kind of what the output is here. And I'm just going to hit save and close it down. And what that did is we go to, and notice how the output went into where our executable was. It did not go where the CS file was. So where the executable is, and then we can look at that. And notice, hey, that we just got all the names all together here. Now you can see that in action by setting a breakpoint and seeing what's going on if you wish. But here's what we're going to do to make a change. We're going to make that write line so that we have a delimitation. And I'm just going to overwrite that file. Hopefully, I think I closed it. So let's just go ahead and run it. And then hit it. And then we've got our file. Okay, so there. So basically, write line, output the first value in the array, put a new line character in there. Same thing all the way through. So that turned out well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this output line delimited. Okay, now here's what I would do here now is if I was doing a comma separated values is I would do a write, but what I would do is every time I did a write, I would output a comma, but we don't want to do a comma on the last one. So what we can do here is we can just do a write. Oh, well, gotta stop the program first. We do a write, and every time we output a name, let's go ahead and add to that name a comma. Just really simple concatenation. But what we're going to do is, because we don't want a comma at the very end, we're just going to go to 4, and then what we'll do out here is we're just going to cheat a little bit, and we'll just make sure that we do a write of SArray without the comma, and we'll do it for the value 4. So that the last one doesn't have a comma in it, and it's kind of quick and easy. So then when I run this, we're going to actually rename this CSV, output CSV, and I'll show you kind of the values that we have here. So output, here it is. Now you notice how the names are done, not the last one, but we got a comma in between each one. That's our delimitator. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this, and I'm going to show you how to load these in shortly here. So I'm going to call this output CSV. Okay, good. So we've got two different types of files that we need to open and load into an array or a list. So essentially, now that we have this, I'm no longer going to have these names here. We're going to actually load those from file, and we don't need to have those ready to go. That's going to come from when we read it from the file. So we're also going to, I'm going to go in here, and we have a save button, and let me get so we can see things. So we're going to want to have a load button, and basically that's going to be working in the reverse. It kind of does everything that save does except for it loads it into memory. So this is going to be our input, and we're just going to call this load. Now when we load, what I want to do is I want to also put the information that we load into a list box. Okay, there we go. Okay, so things that we need for load. Well, what I like to do is, hey, I've already got pretty much the whole process for saving. Let's go ahead and put that for loading, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to, instead of StreamWriter, this becomes StreamReader. And instead of F output, this becomes F input. And what file do I want? Well, that I'm going to go ahead and just put in. We're going to we're going to actually do the line separated file first. So where have we got that? We got that in, on the desktop. And we've got in our names and our binary. I'll have to keep this up so I don't have to search again for it. So we got output line delimitated. So that is the file that we're going to open up and put into our list box and our array. So let's go ahead and go into here, and this is going to change to line delimitated text for input. Now this is our file pointer, so that's going to have to change here. Now remember, whenever you open, you immediately close, and a lot of this is going to change because we're going to still need to loop for 5 times. Actually, you know what we're going to do? Yeah, we're going to loop for 5 times, but here's where we're going to actually put the data in. We need to put the data into our array. Our array is instantiated and ready to go. So we're going to use the I count, and we're going to say SArray of I, starting at 0, is equal to F input dot read line. Now what that means is it's going to read the information in the text file, and it's going to read up until it hits that new line \r\n character that's in the ASCII code. You might want to research ASCII code. Let me show you kind of what I'm talking about. If you've not heard me refer to it again before, but ASCII code is basically the very bottom level of all computers and the keyboard and the text that they have available to them. So when we got here, we have essentially we have end of line and carriage return values for line feed new line. That is going to be ASCII value 10. You can also use those escape character sequences to deal with it, but essentially that's what we're doing. Is we're doing a new line character, a carriage return, and a new line character based on this code right here. So that read line, what it does is it reads up until it grabs a hold of that new line character, and then this line of code is done, and the loop starts over again, and we read the next line. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I got to close this because we can't have multiple processes with access to that file because we're going to open it up in our process. And one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say listbox1.items.add, and then it's going to be the value that we get from the file. And I'm going to set a breakpoint here so that we can kind of talk about this as it runs. So let's save, run it, and I'm going to hit load, and we create the file object. So we do a step over, and we start I at 0. We have sArray, so I'm going to look at locals, and we should have sArray pop up, or we can set a watch for it. But when it goes into the loop, right here, let's see, yeah, we're going to have to set a breakpoint, or we're going to have to set a watch for that. So I'm going to say add watch. Okay, I just did a right click on that and went to add watch right there for that variable. So you just select the variable, right click, and say add watch, and then it'll pop up and it'll show you what it is. So this is showing us every placement. So the first line runs, it goes to the file, and the file pointer always begins at the very beginning of the file, and it's going to read up until it hits that new line character at the end, and that's what it's going to put into our array. So after the first line, we have John, and it's read up to the first delimiter, the \r\n. Then we add what it read to the list box, and we go in and we start again. But now I iterates, and we are up at the sArray of 1, and the file pointer. Let me see if I can open it. Maybe it might allow me to open it. The file pointer read up to here, read the new line, and now the file pointer is right there, and we tell it to read again. So read again, so then it does, and it reads this all the way to the end, the new line, starts again back to here. So we got that loaded in, moved it into the list box, come back, our file pointer or the placement in the file that we're at, we've read up to Gwen, we're back into the loop, and our file pointer is now there. Okay, so now we're going to read in again, another line. Now we have Jody. File pointer has now moved up to here, got the new line, and it goes there. And the next one in is Cody. And then of course we know that there's only 5 items in the array. What you can do is there's actually at the end of every file there's a special end of file character, so you can do this with a while, not at end of file. But since I know there's 5 items in there, I'm good. I'm sure your book shows you, or probably shows you the example of doing a while loop, not while you're not at the end of the file, read this data. So we're done with reading the file. Come out, loop's done, close the file. Alright, so that shows us how to do it with a line separated or a line delimiter, a new line delimiter. So essentially I'm going to hit play here, and it's going to finish out, come back to the form, and we have our list of names based on an array that was then read from a file. So let's show you the other way of doing things, which is to do what's called a comma separated file, or a CSV file. So that's going to be a different file name, and it's going to be output CSV. So we're going to do this. We're going to do output CSV, and what we're going to do is we're just going to, we don't need the loop right now. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. We're going to use it for something else. But what we're going to do is we're going to read everything into one string. And that's what the read function does, is it reads the whole file. So I'm going to say, I'm going to create a string called file contents, and I'm going to say it's equal to f_input.read. Okay, so let's do a interesting. Okay, I'm going to pause and come back real quick. Hold on a second. Okay, so I was just looking a little bit on some of the things on this library, but it looks like what I would like to do is I'd like to use the read to end, and essentially what it's going to do, it's going to read the whole file until it reaches the end of file character, or the end of the string. So, and then it's going to take all the information in that string and put it into this string. So let's do just a quick breakpoint. Now we created that CSV file, comma separated file, and what we're going to do is just read it all. So I'm just going to show you essentially the value of what the file contents is going to hold when we do a read to end. And you see here that the file contents itself variable, the string, if I go to add a watch, it's going to contain everything in the file. So this is kind of what parsing and tokenizing is all about. So now what we have to do is we have got to go in and we got to separate these values out. So fortunately we got a nice little tool to do that for us, and it's called the split method. And the split method, what it'll do is it'll take a string and it will split it up, and then based on a delimiter, and it will return an array of strings. We have our array of strings all ready to go, so what we can do is we can just say, okay, SArray is equal to file contents dot split. Now this is split function is special because what it does is it'll split everything up based on one char or character separator. So in this case we're going to use the character, literal character of the comma, and we're going to tell it to split based on the comma. So let's look at this in the debugger, and I can show you kind of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and say load. We get everything in the file contents, then we split the file contents to be held in the SArray. So right now currently the SArray, everything is null. So I'm going to do another step over, and look at what happens. It fills it all up automatically. So you just tell it that you're going to delimitate the values based on the comma, and it's going to put it in the array for you. Otherwise you would just go through and do what's called parsing and tokenizing the hard way, which is build your own split function and so forth. So in this case we no longer need to read a line. We have it all ready to go. We just need to fill up the list box based on our SArray. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop. I'm going to start it. We read it all in, and it works great. So that's kind of two methods for text input. As you know, you could do it line by line, which is what I would suggest you guys do for your assignment. Do a read line. Um, it's just going to be the most. It's a good beginner route, but it gets even more complicated than that when you start going with different type of files, and then of course it gets more complicated when you start considering binary input and output. So I'm going to pause real quick and make sure that there's not anything else that I want to cover, and I'll be right back. Okay, so the one thing that I kind of want to just add, just for you know, basically the way that we're doing this is called hard coding. We're basically hard coding in so that it can open up no other file than what we specify here. So a good thing to do is we want to be able to allow the user to choose the file. And what we're going to add in the toolbox is essentially what we call a dialog box. And this is going to be a file open dialog box. So what we can do is we can go down here to dialogs, and we can either instantiate an open file dialog, or we can just drag it in from over here and it'll create for us, and it instantiates the open file dialog one for us so that we can use it within our code. It'll put it in the partial CS file. So basically what it does is it puts it, let's see, goes here to form, and we go to the designer.cs. We look at Windows Forms generated code. Here's where it creates the actual variable. So we can just write this, put this code right into our load function, or and then also add the actual instantiation of the open file dialog one variable. But you know, hey, why do it when you can just drag it over? Simple, quick, and easy. So now what we want to do is we want to get the path of the file from the user. So what we can do is, well, let's go ahead, and since I don't memorize these things, we can do a search on Google for C# open file dialog, and we can grab some already made code. Now, one thing about the show dialog is that if you were to hit the OK or the cancel button when the dialog pops up, it sets a variable inside of the dialog box itself saying that, hey, you hit OK. So only when the user hits OK do we actually go ahead and open the file. So I'm going to want to take this if statement, and this is what I'm going to use inside of my code. And here is where we do the whole process of opening a file. So we want to tell the user, okay, show the dialog to the user, and only if they hit OK when they're done, that means that, hey, they selected a file, and that file that they select is just part of the object. So what we'll do is we'll go to open file dialog one dot, and this is where the name will be. I think it's like file name. There we go. Now let's look at this in the debugger, because this is kind of, you can also add filters to your dialog box that only shows text files or whatnot, but that you can read about and do some research on your own. So I just want to show you a little bit about how this works. So I'm going to set a breakpoint there. Hit start. Counter go load. Now this is where the dialog is going to pop up. It's going to show the dialog, and then when you hit the OK button, it comes back and finishes the if statement. So I'm going to go ahead and do a continue, step over. Here's the dialog box that we just opened up, and what I want to do is I'm going to, you can set the default file name and the filter on here, but I'm going to go to the desktop, I'm going to go to our folder, names, and I'm going to choose the actual output CSV, I believe is the one. I'll choose that one. I'm going to say open. Okay, then I'm going to step over, and since I hit OK, then open is basically OK. Step over, it's going to go into my if statement. And what we're actually sending it is, you see here that the StreamReader is going to receive the full directory of that file that we selected. And you see the double backslashes. That's because backslash is a formatter in C#, and basically what we're saying is, no, we're not formatting anything. This is actually backslash, and that's why you need two. They're called escape characters. Go ahead and research that. They're fairly important, especially when you have code that is writing code. Yeah, you can write code that writes code, and that's part of it, is escape characters and understanding of that. So in this case here, we pick the file and knows which one to open up, and then we go ahead and complete our tasks. So then I will just hit play, and we have our names. Okay, so here's kind of a few things in C# that you can kind of get a little bit more, you can have a little bit more fun with. So essentially, we really don't need this variable, because what we can do is we can say, okay, read to the end, and then split based on a comma. So that's why I love C#, is they can, that instruction itself is essentially something that you can take, and what happens is they build a quick little string that you can't see. It's just kind of going on the back screen, back end, and then that is then used to first you read it and get the string, and then it splits the string, and then it assigns that value to SRA. It's kind of cool that you can do this sort of thing with C#, and that's what I love about super languages. I also call them tertiary languages. They're really slick. Okay, so here we go. We got that, and let's go ahead and load, pick our value, and we're good to go. Okay, so here's kind of a general rule of thumb. First thing that you're going to want to start is create your memory. Then you noticed how I filled the memory. So you create your memory, you fill your memory. So we'll do something like SRA of 0, then print the memory. So then you would do a message box.show of SRA of 0. Start in this direction. And once you have your memory and you're ready to work with your memory, then you can start, and you have an understanding of working with your memory, then you can start using that memory to input information into that array, or the memory itself from the file. Now your book has a different mechanism for doing this whole thing, and what it does is it does a while loop, and it will do something like instead of this read to end, you'll have your read line. So when we go back to that type of code, SRA dot is SRA of I is equal to, let's see, f input dot read line. That's what we had. Okay, so no, this has to happen multiple times, and we did it with just in a for loop, and then we put that in here, and that's the kind of the first example that I showed you. Well, your book will show you that, basically, if you don't know how many names are in the file, then what you would want to go is with a different mechanism. You would want to do this. You would want to say while not f input dot eof, end of string. So basically, you're saying, hey, keep reading until we get to the end of the string of the file. So it looks like that is a Boolean value, and then what we would do is we would have an int counter and assign it to 0, and we would say SArray of counter equals readline, and then this would be counter, and then we would do counter plus plus. But here's the trick. So when you're creating and you're instantiating the memory, you have to have kind of a knowledge of what is going into there. So in this case, you would no longer want to use an array. You would want to use a list, because a list can add memory as you are progressing in your process. Now, and it's called dynamic memory. Now, in the case of an array, that's not dynamic memory. That is static at 5, size of 5. So in this case, we don't know how many lines would be or how many names would be in this file. So we would want to add the memory as we go, and that's what a list is for. So instead of that being an array, we would say that we're going to have a list of strings, and it's going to be called SArray. And what we would do is we would say SArray is equal to new list of strings. And once we created that list, then as we are reading information in, we can say then instead of SArray of counter, we would then use this. We would say SArray dot add, and we would want to add the line that we read from. And then we can say go to the list box and add that value that you just added onto the list at that location in the list. So now we're using dynamic memory so that if we wanted to, we can go in here and to here and add some names, and it could be as many as we want, or it could be as little as we want, because a list is adding that memory as we go. It's not saying, oh, I only need 5. It's saying, okay, I have the ability to, basically it's a pointer that points to values that are being added to the list. So if you want to really know about a list and how that works, I would suggest you guys go ahead and review that linked list extra credit that is available to you. There's 3 videos on it that are pretty good to show you how to build your own linked list, or you can just use one that's already built. So let's go ahead, and since now we're doing this until end of stream and we just added more values, let's go ahead and set up a breakpoint and see how it actually works, and then we'll pretty much be done with the video as far as everything that I kind of wanted to show to you. So we're going to do lined this time, and we input we get the file, open it up, here it is right there, set up a counter to keep track of how many items I have, and while we're not at the end of the stream, read a line and add it to the list. So right now the list is no longer an array, it says count is 0, so we've got count of 0, so we're going to add the line that we just read, and we see count of 1. We look at it, and oh, it's our first one. And then we add that to our list box based on our counter that's starting at 0, and we keep track of how many we actually have. But the list box itself and the list itself also have a count. So we are only really using this to grab each little item out of the list itself and put it into the list box, which is also a list. So we keep going with this, and it keeps adding them in. And we've got 2 and so forth, and I'm just going to hit play, and when it gets down to the end of stream, it stops. As soon as it gets to the end of the file, it stops, and then we have now our dynamic list. And so that's the difference between arrays and lists, because now this is the best way of doing things, because now we can go into our file of our list of names, and we can just add whatever we want, and our program will work right well with it because it's based on dynamic memory, and it's no longer stuck with hard code or hard coding. Okay, so this is pretty much enough, and I'll be continuing with some videos as we progress. All right, thank you.